Hello everybody, it is I, Captain Oblivious Mist, and today we're going to be doing the final part of the Brunel trilogy, the Great Eastern, which I have got a model of, as you can see here. Very nice, very big stern. Anyways, enough blabbering on. Before we get into the video, I've got a few things I'd like to clear up. Some of you may or may not already know that I do not like this ship, hence the name Brunel's Great Failure. I will try and keep my opinions out of this video, but, you know, it's not always possible. So if I do feel like I'm coming off as a bit too harsh, then I do apologise in advance. But anyways, enough blabbering on, as we need to go and start covering the history of, well, this great ship that I have a miniature version of. In 1838, Brunel's first ship, called the Great Western, hit the waves. She proved to be quite successful, leading to Brunel building a new revolutionary ship that was to be powered by screw propulsion instead of paddle wheels. Now, if you couldn't tell, Brunel was quite ambitious, leading him to look at his previous two ships and thinking to himself, why don't I build the biggest ship in the world? This led to Brunel beginning to design what would ultimately be his greatest failure. This new ship was to be called the Great Eastern, and even in his early sketches, the Great Eastern was planned to be 6 times the size of the biggest ships in the world at that time. During the planning process, it was decided that the Great Eastern would have 2 methods of propulsion, a screw propeller and a paddle wheel, giving the Great Eastern a service speed of 14 knots. Now, as for a construction process, it was extremely eventful and funny, as on her launch day she slided elegantly down the slipway. Or, well, she would have if she didn't get stuck partway through her launch, killing 2 men. But as if the embarrassment wasn't bad enough, there were many important people within the crowd who watched the hilarious screw-up. So the next time you tear your trousers when you bend over to pick something up or call your teacher Mom, remember this story and think to yourself, well, at least I didn't get stuck on my way down a slipway. Now, enough talking about the Great Eastern's poor first attempt at a launch, as there was a second attempt, which didn't go particularly well as well, thanks to high winds. But by the next day, she was thankfully launched, but the nightmare that was a construction process was not over yet, as she had to be fitted out. During this process, the company that owned the Great Eastern went broke, leading to her to be sold to another company, which meant that she would not serve on her planned India to Australia route, but would instead serve on the transatlantic route. But more on that later, as the Great Eastern's life was soon to start off with a bang. Before she could begin her maiden voyage, disaster would strike, as she was hosting some foreign dignitaries when the Great Eastern's funnels decided to try and beat the USA and the USSR in the space race about 90 years early, and blasted off to the moon. Because of this, many people cancelled their passage on her maiden voyage, meaning when she departed Liverpool for the first time, she only had 43 passengers, 8 of which didn't even pay for their passage. Now, thankfully, she had survived her maiden voyage without incident, well, with the exception of the Great Eastern colliding and damaging her wharf upon her arrival. She was then opened to the public for $1 per person, which enraged New Yorkers, and eventually the Great Eastern left on an excursion to Cape May, and at some stage she went to Annapolis, I don't know how you pronounce that, when the then President James Buchanan decided to tour her. In the winter of 1860, the Great Eastern would receive a refit, and some repairs for the damages that occurred in her first year of service. Though this did not go to plan, as she broke free from her moorings and collided with the HMS Blenheim. Then, in 1861, the Great Eastern would find herself in a hurricane, which she would be stuck in for 3 days, during which she would be battered by the waves, and in fact the damage was so bad that rumours began to spread on board about her pumps being overwhelmed, and that it was only a matter of time before she sunk. Thankfully though, these rumours were false. However, that isn't to say that no one got a bit too close for comfort with the ocean, as on the list of damaged parts of the ship was her rudder, which had been bent about 200 degrees and torn up by her own propellers, which could have been a major problem if it wasn't for a guy called Hamilton Towel, who fitted a jury-rigged propeller, making it possible for the Great Eastern to sail to Queenstown, Ireland. Though she was towed in 3 days after her arrival because she was too big. Oh, that poor Great Eastern. In 1862, while she was sailing off near Montauk Point, she collided with a rock that would later be named after her. She survived this and arrived in New York without event. Then, in 1864, she was sold and then chartered out to Cyrus Westfield, where she would go on to lay the first transatlantic cable. She would continue to lay cables with great success. However, despite this, in 1874, a new purpose-built cable-laying ship was well built, removing the need for a ship like the Great Eastern. So after a failed attempt at pushing her back into commercial service, it was decided that she would become a billboard. And no, I am not making that up. Thankfully for the Great Eastern, this embarrassing time wouldn't last forever, and her end was just around the corner. In 1888, she was sold for scrap. Now, you're probably wondering why this is its own section. Well, that's simple. That's because the scrapping process wasn't as easy as other ship scrapping processes. As upon her being sold for scrap, that is scrappable way too many times in one sentence, it was realised that she was too big to be scrapped the normal way. So it was decided that the shipbreakers would become Miley Cyrus and... I came in like a wrecking ball. And for those of you who are still confused on how they scrapped the ship, it was decided that they'd use a wrecking ball. Though not a lot, some part of Brunel's great failure still remain today. For example, part of her funnel now stands in the Great Britain Museum in Bristol. And for the football fans in the audience, one of the Great Eastern's top masts now flies the Liverpool FC flag at the Kop end of Anfield. And in 2013, a song called The Ballad of the Great Eastern was made. And not only this, but the Great Eastern has been the setting of 3 fiction books in her time, 2 of which are very unoriginal in their names. These books are called A Floating City, and the other 2 are just called Great Eastern. She also appeared in the 2019 game Anno 1800. Hello everybody, it is I, Captain Oblivious Mist, and I am back with another epilogue, and I'd like to start this epilogue off by saying, finally the Brunel trilogy is finished. I'd then like to continue on by saying, can you guess when this video was originally planned to release? No? Well, let's start. It was originally meant to come out in late October, as there was a delay with the Great Britain video, so the sequel to the Great Britain video would have been coming out in late October. But then I got ill, and I continued to be ill until November, and it was at that point where I thought, well, I've done well, okay, but unfortunately I have to push it into December, and then the Christmas special came along, and then I got backlogged in tons of videos, and I thought, well, I'll do it in January, and then I remembered I'm taking a month off in January because I was focused on some other projects, and now we're finally here with the video finished. Now, whether it's March or February as I'm recording this, I don't know. As I'm uploading this, as I'm recording this, it's January, so who knows? I mean, my channel could have completely exploded by this point. But anyway,
and an international
but yes, really all gotta say, thank you for watching everyone, and I shall see you in my next video.
Clifton suspension bridge,
Goodbye.
built by Brunel himself.